Hello guys, it's Chamaster here doing a Beyblade discussion. This time I'm talking about BX and why I believe it should end. I've talked about this a few times before, but I've never made a full-on dedicated video to the topic because I just felt like it was something that would be potentially controversial. Kinda didn't want to deal with that, but I also kinda want to talk about it anyway, so whatever, let's just talk about it. So before I start the main stuff, I want to give some context. Up until early this year, I was under the impression that Beyblade X would phase out lines. Obviously, BX was the main system, as it was the only system until we got UX. After this, there was a decent mix of releases. BX was still pretty prominent until July of last year. And then after that, it was sort of taking a backseat, it felt like. The releases were just random booster selects or just boosters, and that was really it. UX was getting all of the spotlight. We also knew that February was going to have a random booster select, and with CX coming out the month after, I figured it was just a final BX Bay, and after that, we would just be getting UX and CX. Aside from the Hasbro variants, but I'm not really counting those. I feel like this would make a lot of sense. You get a new line, that new line and the line before it kind of coexist. After a few months, that new line would kind of take over, the other line would take a backseat, until just kind of being phased out when the next line comes out. While I kind of prefer just a traditional system of one line at a time, I think this is perfectly fine. However, this was debunked because now we have Triceratops that just came out in June, which I don't have yet, unfortunately, but hopefully I'll be getting it soon. But anyway. And we're also getting a BX Bay in August. I think it's fairly likely that we'll probably get another list in late July, and that'll go through January, and we'll probably see another BX Bay or two on there. So as of right now, it kinda seems like BX is here to stay, and why? When you compare BX to other systems, I feel like it kind of just becomes clear there's no reason for it to really exist anymore. It's the basic line, there's nothing really interesting about it. Most BX bays are like this, but then they were starting to release some more interesting ones. For example here, of course, being Cobalt Dragoon. The parts aren't that interesting, but Cobalt Dragoon is a left spin blade, and so far, aside from the Eldrago remake, the only left spin blade. After this, we also got Whale Wave, which I feel is shockingly dynamic for a BX Bay. The blade has kind of a down smash idea, and the parts work really well for that, and Elevate, I think, is honestly a fairly unique bit. Then there was Crimson Garuda, not that interesting of a blade, but the bit was Transpoint. It's effectively a low point to start, but after an extreme dash becomes high point. This is a fairly gimmicky part. I think it shows that ratchets and bits are pretty unrestricted based on their system. And it's more so just a blade thing, so yeah, Crimson Garuda isn't that interesting in terms of its blade, but it can still have interesting parts, which again, I'm not sure why we need this divide or why the system really needs to exist. The next bay, and the last one that I actually have in hand, is Shelter Drake. I think we can all agree this bay does like absolutely nothing and is very uninteresting. Why does this exist? This definitely feels like a basic bay. And while I unfortunately don't have it, we also have Triceratops. The hooks on Triceratops are larger, which is kind of interesting, I guess. Makes the blade shape a little bit different. Has a reused bit, but it has M85, a ratchet with metal, again, further proving that the parts are not necessarily restricted by the blade system. But also, why do we still need BX blades again? So let's go and compare to some other lines, such as UX and CX, the current other lines in Beyblade X. So UX blades can have gimmicks, like Nightmail here having the metal balls, which is pretty cool. I like that. And CX blades are divided. CX blades don't have gimmicks or anything, but still at this point, why isn't every BX bay a CX bay? If you're not gonna do gimmicks, why not just divide it and make it more dynamic in that sense? We don't really need BX anymore. And if you want to argue saying that BX bays are different because it's just one solid part, meaning that maybe you could do things that you can't do on a CX bay, my problem with that is then why not just have UX bays? Like, we have something like Ghost Circle, and this isn't even unique to Ghost Circle. Actually, most UX bays don't have a gimmick. Of the 14, only 5 of them have a true gimmick. Ghost Circle does nothing. The blade still has an idea behind it, sure, but plenty of BX blades are also like that. The only differences between UX and BX at that point is just kind of the overall structure of the blade, and why are we bothering making that such a big deal? Any BX bay could just be a gimmickless UX bay or a CX bay because they have higher potential to be more interesting. There's no real reason to keep BX around anymore. I mean, for future lines, are we just going to keep having alternate takes on divided blades or something? Is that all we're going to do? We're not going to build at all? Will there just not be a gimmick-based divided blade or gimmick select to UX? I don't know. But regardless, UX bays at least have the potential to do more, and CX bays obviously have to do more because they are divided. BX exist, and you know you're not getting a single interesting thing out of the blade, at least in comparison to the other blades, because again, they don't really do anything. I feel like BX is just kind of boring and doesn't really need to keep getting bays. Some people probably don't mind this right now though, and I can't entirely blame them for that. Beyblade X is just about 2 years old now, and we have 3 lines, and CX is only a few months old. But the thing is, in let's just say 4 years into Beyblade X, are people still going to care about BX bays if we're still getting them? I don't think so. It's just going to feel very dated and just like a system that we don't need to see more of. I feel like there's already been kind of a sentiment about people not really caring about BX. Obviously, sure, there's competitive stuff people are going to care about, but I'm not really talking about that. I'm just talking about the interest of the bays themselves. There was some interest in Whale Wave, I think, but beyond that, how many people cared about Crimson Garuda over Samurai Saber or Night Mail? I'm sure there was a few, but it was definitely a minority, and I think most people were more interested in Transpoint. The rest are probably just happy to actually have kind of a Dronzer-inspired bay to complete the collection of the original 4 Bakugan bays. After that, Shelter Drake. Did anyone care about Shelter Drake? Like, at all? I really don't remember anyone caring. And what about Triceratops? It's cool, I guess. It's also the only June bay, but even then I feel like a lot of people aren't caring. Most people want to check out M85 because it's a new idea, but that's really about it. I feel like the blade itself has gotten pretty ignored, and I'm willing to bet that the August BX bay is also gonna kinda get lost in favor of the UX deck set. While some people might be okay with BX, I feel like a lot of people are just getting bored of it. And as Beyblade X goes on and they keep trying to force BX bays every now and again, I feel like the sentiment's just going to get worse and people are going to care less and less about these bays. Now, let's just set up a hypothetical situation. Let's just say we are 4 years into Beyblade X right now. It's 2027. We have 5 lines. Let's just say GX and DX, Gravity X and Dynamic X. GX is an alternate divided blade system that has flippable blades. Basically, the metal blade could be on top or on bottom, the other part is a plastic blade. Kind of like Zero G without the synchro, it's just kind of a gravity thing, which is why I came up with the name GX. For DX, Dynamic X, the blade would be divided, but have gimmicks, kind of like CX plus UX effectively. I imagine the blade system itself would be different than CX, but just kind of a vague idea. If you have 5 lines running at once, how do you even manage that in terms of releases? Because I imagine if DX is the newest, that gets the bulk of releases, GX would probably get a decent bit, but for BX, UX, and CX, you probably get 1 or 2 per year, so why keep them around when you have to balance 5 lines? It just seems difficult. Just cut it down to like 2, maybe 3. Even then, you could at least make arguments for the other 4 lines, but there isn't really a good argument for BX's existence. You have 3 divided blade systems at that point. GX and DX have their own ideas. UX could at least be for maybe crazier gimmicks that you want a fused blade for, although I don't know if X would really do that, but anyway. And then CX is kind of the basic line. It's just the kind of standard divided blade that doesn't do a whole lot else. Why do we need a standard fused blade at that point? BX doesn't need to exist. Sorry if the GX or DX things were a little bit weird. I just want to kind of make it seem like, a realistic scenario, and I hope that those lines at least felt like they could happen. But if we're in that situation, I don't think BX in particular needs to exist, but also when you have so many systems going, I feel like the older ones just start to get lost, because again, you're either just taking away from newer systems that I think need more bays, or you're really just trying to force out a couple of releases per year just to keep this line going for some reason, even though it doesn't need to. Also, again, we're 2 years in, so BX isn't that old, but it is still starting to get a little bit boring, and I think by the time we're 4 years in, it's just going to be really boring. Especially if we do have 5 lines at that point. And by that point, we might have like 50 plus BX bays, especially when you take into account variants. Are we really going to get excited about a 50-second BX bay that doesn't have a gimmick and is just another alternate shape of a blade? We can only get so many of them. At that point, they're going to be hard carried out parts, but again, why not just put those parts on more interesting blades? Again, I just don't think BX really needs to exist. If you want a fused gimmickless blade, again, you could just do UX at that point, since we already have plenty of bays, like Go Circle here, that are just that. But otherwise, BX bays are just kind of here, and they kind of don't really need to be. I really wish they would have just phased it out back in February. We were just done at that point. It's just UX and CX, and then UX can get phased eventually and replaced with something more interesting later. I think that would have been ideal. Not everyone is on board with phasing out lines, and some people like it, but again, I just don't see that sentiment being kept in a few years when we have 50 plus BX bays if they just keep making them. I know some people also cite balance as a good thing, keeping old lines relevant, but at the same time, just look at BX bays in particular. A lot of BX blades aren't actually that competitive anymore. And let me ask, are any BX blades from 2023 in particular competitive still? Maybe 2 of them? Shark Edge and Phoenix Swing? Shark Edge is like barely, and Phoenix Swing, well, it's gotten updated molds that are heavier, which people are preferring for competitive when they do use it, so I don't know, I think power creep can still happen even if you keep BX around. The later BX bays are just going to be heavier and better. Triceratops is a defense type and it's like 36 grams. That would have been unheard of a few years ago when BX first started. So I don't really think balance is a great reason to keep BX around either. Obviously, I don't want crazy weight and size creep, but I'm just saying it can happen even if they do keep the older lines around. That's basically all to say. I just want to sit down and talk about why I don't really want BX to stay around. Well, I think they're going to keep around even if it's like 1 or 2 per year. I just don't really want it to stay around. I don't think it needs to. Honestly, I hope later this year, or by the time we get a 4th line next year, that they do just end up phasing out. Maybe it's 3 lines at the same time for whatever reason. I don't know. After we got later into UX, maybe these extra BX bays are just trying to give us some more interesting parts and experiment, and then it'll just kind of vanish, but I doubt it. I personally just think they kind of take away from more interesting stuff, and we'll see what they do, but as of right now, I just hope they get rid of them over time. I don't think they will, but it'd be helpful. Anyway, let me know what you think about how Beyblade X has been handling lines. If you can't tell, I'm not too happy about it, but we do have to wait and see what happens. BX is definitely the biggest problem, because I can at least see cases for UX and CX later, even if I do want them to be replaced. But BX, man, it's not enough, so that's all. Anyways, thanks for watching, and bye-bye.